My parents disappear. Every October 31st, I don't mean they leave for a party or a night out. No, they'd vanish, gone without a trace by sunset, leaving me alone in the house. I'd search for them, call their names, but they were always gone, like they'd never existed. It wasn't something we ever talked about. The next morning they'd be back, acting as if nothing had happened, like it was just another night. But it wasn't. I knew that. I learned that the hard way. It all started when I was 6 years old. I remember that first Halloween like it was yesterday. I was dressed as a witch, excited to go trick-or-treating, but just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed the house felt different. Cold, quiet, too quiet. I ran through the halls, calling for my mom and dad, but no one answered. Panic set in. I thought maybe they were hiding, playing a prank, but after what felt like hours of searching, I realized they were gone. The front door was locked, the windows were shut, and I was completely alone. That's when I found the first note. It was on the kitchen table, written in my mom's familiar handwriting. It simply said, "Rule 1. Stay in your room. Do not come out until sunrise. Whatever you hear, ignore it." I didn't understand then. I was scared, confused, and alone. I didn't want to stay in my room. I wanted to find my parents, but something about the note made me follow the instructions. I took a flashlight and a pillow, locked myself in my room, and crawled under the covers. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird game. I wasn't sure. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house creaked and groaned more than usual. I heard strange noises, soft scratching at my door, footsteps in the hallway, whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I told myself it was the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was in the house with me. The next morning, when I opened my door, my parents were back. They were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, like nothing had happened. I asked them where they'd gone, what had happened, but they just smiled and said, "I must have had a bad dream." That was the beginning. Every Halloween after that was the same. My parents would disappear just before nightfall, leaving me alone with a note. Each year, the instructions got a little more specific, a little more ominous. By the time I was 8, the notes included things like, Rule 2, don't look out the windows. And Rule 3, don't respond if someone calls your name. And the noises, they got worse. One year, when I was 9, the sounds outside my room became unbearable. There were knocks on the door, not gentle, but loud, insistent pounding. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, but I couldn't block it out. The voice on the other side was familiar. My mother's voice, calling my name. "Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now." She sounded so calm, so normal. For a second, I almost believed it was really her, but the rule had been clear. Do not open the door, no matter what you hear. So I didn't. I stayed under the covers, trembling, until the knocking stopped. I never told my parents about the voice, and they never asked. The years passed, and the game continued. It became a twisted Halloween tradition. While other kids dressed up and collected candy, I stayed locked in my room, listening to the house come alive with things I couldn't see. I became used to the notes, the strange noises, and the feeling of being watched. It was all part of the game, my own haunted ritual. But when I turned 13, everything changed. That year, the note was different. I found it on my bed just as the sun was setting, but instead of the usual instructions, it said, Rule 4. There's something new in the house tonight. Be careful. I didn't know what that meant, but the moment I read it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something new? What did that mean? I locked my door, as usual, and tried to settle in for the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The noises started earlier than usual. At first, it was the familiar creaks and footsteps. I'd gotten used to those. But then, there was something else. Breathing. I could hear it, low and heavy, just outside my door. It wasn't human. It was too slow, too deep. I pressed myself against the headboard, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The breathing moved away after a while, but then came the scratching. It wasn't at my door this time. It was coming from inside my room. I whipped the flashlight around, scanning the walls, the ceiling, but there was nothing. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from beneath my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat dry with fear. I didn't dare look under the bed. I was too scared of what I might find. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, childlike giggle. The sound of it froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't me. It wasn't my parents. Something was in the room with me. I backed up against the wall, holding the flashlight out in front of me, like it could protect me from whatever was there. The giggling continued, soft and mocking. I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's just a game." But I didn't believe it anymore. Suddenly there was a loud bang on the door. The whole room seemed to shake with the force of it. I dropped the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. The breathing was back, but this time, it was right outside my door. Bang! Another hit. The door shuddered. Bang! The lock rattled. Whatever was out there was trying to get in. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold it. The banging grew more violent, each hit sounding like the door was about to give in. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Pure, deafening silence. I held my breath, waiting, listening for any sign of movement. Then the voice returned, soft and sweet, like honey. "Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now." It was my mother's voice again, but this time I knew it wasn't her. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen in fear, praying for the night to end. The voice called out again, more insistent this time. "Ellie, don't be scared. It's just a game." My hands were trembling and I could barely hold onto the flashlight. The voice kept calling, but I stayed silent. I knew the rules. I knew I couldn't open the door. But then something strange happened. The door, it began to unlock. I heard the soft click of the lock turning, and the handle slowly twisted. "No," I whispered, pressing myself further against the wall, willing the door to stay shut. But it was too late. The door creaked open, just a crack, but enough for me to see a shadow in the hallway. Something tall and thin, its limbs too long, its fingers clawed. It wasn't my mother. The creature stood in the doorway, unmoving, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like I might pass out. And then, just as it stepped forward, the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. The creature recoiled, hissing like an animal, and within seconds, it was gone. The door slammed shut, and the house was quiet again. I didn't leave my room until the sun was fully up. When I finally opened the door, the house was just as it had been the night before. Silent, empty, as if nothing had happened. My parents were back, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like they always did. I stumbled in, shaken and pale, and told them everything. The creature, the scratching, the voice that wasn't my mother's. They just looked at me, exchanged glances, and then my dad laughed softly. "You must have had a bad dream," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing like that happened, Ellie. It was just your imagination." My mom smiled at the same strange smile and added, You're safe now. It's over. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't just a dream. The fear, the things I'd heard and seen, they were real. They had to be. My parents didn't believe me. They never did. And that was the most terrifying part. Now, as an adult with children of my own, I know the truth. Whatever haunted me in that house, whatever played that sick game, it's still out there, waiting. And it's hungry. I fear for the lives of my children. I'll never let them go through what I went through. I'll protect them at all costs, even if it means never celebrating Halloween, never letting the night touch them the way it touched me. Because I know, deep down, that it's only a matter of time before the game starts again. Halloween is coming. The Paperboy. I couldn't tell you the first time it happened, and I wish I could tell you the final time it will happen. A boy who would appear to be maybe 12 or so rides on an old rusty bike and tosses the paper with such precision, one could assume he'd have a promising career with the Boston Red Sox. Heck, he'd probably soar in the NFL too. But something was seriously off about the kid. He didn't show up every single morning. But when he came, you knew it. You could hear his rusty bike chain struggling. It was as if the noise itself was elevated by invisible speakers. He would throw the paper dead center of everyone's doorstep. The paper didn't have a name such as the New York Times or whatever your hometown has. It was just simply blank. I remember the first paper I got. I woke up extremely tired from a sleepless night. I brewed some coffee and opened the door to see the leaves falling. That's when I seen the paper. Local restaurant closes down today. I didn't think much of it. Restaurants close all the time. It's one of the hardest businesses to maintain. It wasn't until I pulled up to my favorite Chinese restaurant that they announced on the door they were closed for good. No explanation. Months go by, and I seen him riding down to the next house on the street. I picked up the paper again. Drunk driver crashes today. Sure enough, a man in our town drove his car into a used car lot, damaging one that was for sale. The man was over double the legal limit according to my cousin who was a cop. 6 months go by, and another one. Jacob dies by stabbing. There's a lot of people named Jacob. Many of those people I'm sure were superstitious and stayed in home that day. The news crew were outside someone's home and said it was an active crime scene. They never did find who did it. At least a year went by when I heard the bike pedaling again. I ran outside and the paper landed at my feet. Full moon tonight. Be cautious. A homeless person was mutilated in the park. They believed it to be some sort of wild animal. The rest of the paper every time was like any other, filled with weather and advertisements. No one ever tried to stop the paperboy to my knowledge. 4 months go by and I see him pedaling. I jog towards him. Hey, quit sending out these papers. Please. He turned his head and spoke back to me. I could have sworn his eyes were pitch black. Just doing my job. I don't write these. The paper went dead center of my porch step. Factory supervisor involved in terrible accident. I wasn't at work for 15 minutes when people began freaking out. A temp on a forklift collided with one of our supervisors, and he was impaled. He died before the ambulance sirens lit up the rainy parking lot. I don't know what made me think it was a great idea, but a year and a half goes by when I spotted him again. I charged towards him on his bike, and he tossed a paper so hard it knocked me flat on my back. Just wait until you get the next one. You'll regret doing that. I sat up and looked at the paper. Body found with all blood gone. The town mayor was found with bite marks on his neck. All the blood on his body was drained. I lived in paranoia the entire day, wondering what he meant. A day goes by when the paperboy came back. Tim gets what he deserved. Shit, that's me. I run back in the house and lock the door when I heard an audible voice. You think you can avoid this? A man comes from my kitchen. He's wearing black pants and a white dress shirt. He's wearing a fedora and black suspenders. He was straightened his tie. His eyes were pitch black, and the smell of rotting eggs filled the room. His arms stretched from across the room and grabbed me by my throat. He picked me up and slammed me against my ceiling and dropped me to my hardwood floor. He picked up my couch and threw it on top of me. I tried to crawl away when I felt his arms start wrapping around my neck, as if they were a snake squeezing the life out of its dinner. He flipped me around and opened his mouth. Razor-sharp teeth, similar to a shark's, plunged into my shoulder. I let out a scream and tried throwing a punch, but was too weak. I woke up in the hospital. My neighbor heard all the commotion and left. He explained. He's seen a well-dressed man walking down the street and finding me in a puddle of my blood. They didn't have any trouble believing him. Once I made it home, I stumbled to the porch and seen another paper on my step. Local paper closing down once a sacrifice is made. This time there were words below the headline. Fellow citizens of this great community, it is with our deepest regret to inform you that we decided to close shop under one specific condition. The condition being that you all choose one person to sacrifice. The decision is up to you all by majority vote. We have plans to set up shop in another town somewhere we choose not to share at the time. However, failure to pick a sacrifice will result in daily paper deliveries, many more creative than the next. Every childless adult is required to attend. I never seen town hall so full of people and such chaos. Of course, no one volunteered. The person was selected after people took their turn speaking. Every business was closed down that day. The person chosen was a man in jail for producing and dealing meth. He didn't know what was happening when he was walked in front of all of us. I still hear his voice say, "What's going on?" The officer said, "I'm sorry." Bang. We never did get any more papers delivered, but the guilt has clearly eaten up this city. I'm not sure if they planned on coming to your town or whoever's town, but I am completely convinced they cannot be stopped. The Bobbing Man. I've never had a kid before, but I've always loved my nieces and my nephew. I can remember the way the world looked as a kid, and I can see it in their eyes. That feeling that whatever is around every corner is new and exciting. That what tomorrow brings, it'll carry with it the warmth of a sunny day, or the comfort of a rainy afternoon. As a grown man, the sun left my skin spotted and weathered. The rain left me shivering and cold. Life had left me homeless and quite alone. It was easy to feel miserable, but those 3 kids didn't need to have my misery thrust upon them. That light in their eyes shouldn't dim around me. So I always tried my best to be their weird uncle. The one with the backpack and smelly socks. The one with a tooth grin and fun stories. I won't ever tell them this story, though. It was a child I had never met that woke me up that morning. My place of rest still shaded from the morning sun, slick with dew as it clung to my ragged windbreaker. "Excuse me? Excuse me?" A small voice cut through the morning traffic and buzz of cicadas. It was tinged with hope and fear. I knew those 2 feelings well. My eyes parted slowly, embracing the morning sunshine. I saw before me a small blonde boy. His bushy blonde eyebrows and chubby physique almost immediately endeared me to this kid. I'm awake. My voice cracked as I rolled over. His thick eyebrows furrowed as he spoke again. "I'm really sorry to wake you up. I just don't have a phone and I really need to call my mom." His small voice had that deep fear in it that kids always had when they were worried they would get in trouble over something completely reasonable. My lips pulled up into a smile as I rubbed my messy hair. "Do you know her phone number, buddy?" I reached into my bag and pulled forth a cracked, dusty phone as he recited it by heart. I suppressed a chuckle. Someone had clearly drilled that phone number into him. I looked down at the phone's cracked face as it half-heartedly turned on, only to flash an empty red battery symbol and die in my hands. "Fuck," I said under my breath, fumbling in my bag for a charger. Aha! I lightly intoned while I revealed a charger from my pack. Sorry, kid, this might take a minute before you can call her. He swayed awkwardly on the spot as his fear of the whole situation was yet to be abated. I felt for this kid. I knew what it was like to be alone in places you're not familiar or comfortable with. It was my whole life. I patted the seat next to me and smiled brightly, attempting to infuse every ounce of kindness I could into my gaze. Want to sit? He looked indecisive until I pulled out a big bag of Skittles. Plenty to go around. He plopped on the bench beside me and pulled a single Skittle from the bag, placing it in his mouth, before grabbing another one. What's your name, buddy? He placed a purple Skittle on his tongue. My name is Trenton, but my mom calls me Trent. I offered him my hand, which probably could have been a little cleaner. I'm Melvin, but people call me stupid. Is it okay if I just call you Melvin? He asked with an adorable sincerity. I laughed and smiled. That's fine with me, Trenton. He smiled back, now being less cautious with the Skittles. Do people really call you stupid? Sometimes, but I tell them to hang up and call me back when they're smarter. He laughed. That's a stupid joke. My phone now read 3% as its screen feebly flickered to life. You can call your mom now, Trenton. Just keep it plugged in, all right? He nodded enthusiastically and dialed her number. She picked up after 3 rings, and a stern but gentle voice crackled from my shitty speakers. This is Miss Waters. How may I help you? Mom, it's me. Jake and his mom left me here. Yes, about 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry, Mom. I listened intently to the mother's furious tone as she reassured Trenton that none of this was his fault. It was then that he handed me the phone and said, "She wants to talk to you." I made a big, goofy, frowny face of fear, and he giggled. "Hi there," I said casually. "I need your name and location, please." I opened my mouth to speak, but my eyes drifted over the large field of the park for the first time since I had opened them. A small black shape caught my eye as it bobbed up and down. I squinted, and it sharpened just slightly into a shape that could have been a man. "Hello, are you there? I need your name and your location now, please," his mother asked, a little forcefully. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I just woke up. My name is Melvin Poole. We're at Green Park down the trail about a half mile," I said quickly as to not incur her ire. Yet my eyes never left that shape as it bobbed up and down. It was strange. It had gotten close enough to tell it was clearly a man, but his gait was off. His head rose and fell too much. Far more than the inch or two most people's did as they walked at a steady pace. "I'll be there in 25 minutes exactly. I want you to stay on the phone with me for the entire time. Do you understand?" I smiled. She was smart. My name, where I was, and not letting me hang up on her. This kid was in good hands. I frowned, however, when I looked at my phone. Its battery was draining quickly. "Ma'am, my phone's battery is about to die. I'd say you have a minute or 2 left before it's dead again." I could almost hear her teeth grit through the speaker. "I'll be there in 20. Be prepared to accept my call when I'm close. Understand?" I felt myself immediately feel smaller than her as her authoritative voice echoed from my phone. "Of course, I'll be here with Trenton. I won't let him out of my sight." Her goodbye was curt and short. My eyes once again darted towards the odd man from across the trail, as Trenton began to speak about a new game he had recently taken up. I did my best to listen, but my eyes won the fight with my ears, as my attention was solely focused on the bobbing man. He had been walking in a straight, unbroken line for the past few minutes now. His heading seemed to directly intersect with the shaded bench we now sat upon. Trenton was oblivious to this, as he finally had let himself relax. I wasn't about to cut that short, yet I could feel my own body beginning to tense up. There was something so deeply unsettling about this man, as more details began to peek from the haze of distance. His black coat, his black bowler hat. If I didn't know any better, I would have assumed he was attending a Renaissance festival or a funeral. The way he walked, however, made me wonder if he was the reason for the funeral rather than your average attendee. What was worse was that he seemed magnetically attracted to this bench I sat upon now, every step taking him closer to where we resided. I wiggled my charger in the phone's socket to no results. The phone's battery was now completely dead. Trenton laughed at something he said, and for the first time, the man's head turned. He slowly brought his head all the way until his chin nearly rested on his shoulder. At first I was relieved, his gaze now broken finally. Yet when Trenton's laughing stopped, the man once again faced the bench. As he continued the bob towards us, a cold chill went down my spine. He had turned his ear towards the laugh, as if to absorb every decibel he possibly could. Now I was struck with indecisiveness and fear. Do I stay with him and wait for his mom like she said, or do I grab this kid and run? The man's pace was steady and rhythmic, like a puppet on a string, his master's hand steadily making him lurch towards us. The morning sun cast his shadow off to his side. It was so long and thin, as if it too wanted nothing to do with, and was attempting to flee from him. "Trenton, buddy, let's go somewhere else," I said, my voice not yet revealing my fear to spare him. He looked at me, his brow once again furrowing. "I can't do that. My mom is coming right here, and I don't want her to be mad at me." My eyes darted back and forth between him and the steadily approaching shape in my peripheral. "She'll be mad at me, bud, not you. I promise. I think she'll find us faster over here anyway." He frowned and said, "I can't leave. I'm gonna stay right here." He stopped and let his head hang. "If you want to leave, that's okay." I tried my utmost to not let an ounce of fear into my voice. I would never leave this kid here alone with this creepy fuck. "I'm staying right here then, alright?" He smiled. The man was now close enough to read his expression. I wish I couldn't. Upon his face rested the most unpleasant smile I had ever laid eyes upon. It was a toothy grin that revealed the spaces between all of his teeth, small gaps to the black abyss that was his mouth. The corners of his mouth were pulled up against his cheekbones in a way that looked like it was carved into marble. I had never seen a man this unsettling in my entire life. His fingers drummed against his leg one by one, too slow to be a rhythm to any music. Just one finger at a time. He was upon us. Trenton finally took notice of the bobbing man and stopped munching on the Skittles. I desperately wanted to look away, yet I forced myself to be transfixed by his ugly mug. This guy was a threat. My deepest of senses knew this. Every ounce of that superhuman ability we all have within us was triggered by this fuck. He addressed me first as his gait finally took him within 10 feet of my bench. He tilted forward ever so slightly as he spoke, so his teeth were the closest thing to me. "Thank you so very much for finding Trent. I've been scouring this place high and low for him." His voice was like sour honey, slow and sticky. It clung to the air and lingered. My eyes darted to Trenton as the man spoke. One look at his face told me Trenton has never seen this motherfucker once in his entire life. "Who are you?" The words didn't have the confidence I wished they did. "A friend." The words slithered out of his mouth in a way that made me want to puke. "I doubt that. Trenton, hand me my phone." "I'm gonna have the cops here any second. I don't want you anywhere near Trenton." His expression didn't flicker for even a moment as the dead phone was passed to me. "I assure you there's no need for that at all. I just want Trent to come with me, and I'll take him to his mother. Save you the hassle." Trenton frowned. "Stop calling me that. Only my mom calls me that." The man didn't even look at him as his gaze was still fixed upon me, the tapping of his fingers now reaching an unsettlingly fast pace as he spoke, the drumming beat intermingling with his words. "I, of course, can reimburse you for your troubles. How does $100 sound? my teeth clenched. Get the fuck away, I said, my voice measured and slow as to not reveal my fear. His smile deepened as his fingers moved blisteringly fast upon his lower thigh. You drive a hard bargain. How about $300? Trenton moved closer to me, hiding mostly behind me now. I drew the pocket knife that I had been keeping hidden within my bag. Last time I'm gonna say this. Leave. His fingers now moved faster than my eyes could see. His hand just a blur as the sound of his fingers drumming on his leg became one continuous buzz. His eyes finally drifted from me and rested upon Trenton. He leaned in a little closer and spoke in a tone that immediately put me into a fight-or-flight panic. You little fat fuck, I'll wear your skin while I bathe in your blood. His smile unbroken. He leaned even closer. Trenton spoke. No, I don't want any candy. I don't want to go with you. The man whispered, I'll watch your mother through her window as she mourns you with a mouthful of your spleen. My body instinctively lashed out with the knife as I held it aloft. Trenton spoke shakily. I don't want to see your puppy, leave me alone. His small voice shaky and tears beginning to trail down his red cheeks. The man jerked forward and backward ever so slightly, his head bobbing up and down as he did so, before he turned around and contorted himself backwards, his hands falling in the grass as his upside-down face flashed us with his plastered grin. Horror had me rooted to the spot. His fingers now all drummed the wet grass, spraying his face with small droplets. I had never seen anything more strange and terrifying in my entire fucking life. He then patted away on his hands and feet, never taking his eyes off the pair of us as he became smaller and smaller, the distinct sound of his tapping growing fainter and fainter. The distance between us did absolutely nothing to diminish my terrors. That knife never left my hand, nor did either of us sit. The sound of his fingers stayed between us for an unnaturally long amount of time, as if it was desperately making its way back to us. We waited in silence as I did my best to control my breathing. My white knuckles gripped the handle of the knife, long after the sound of his fingers could no longer be heard. Suddenly, a blue sedan came hurtling from the highway into the adjacent parking lot. Trenton ran towards it faster than I thought a kid like him could, and hurled himself into his mother's arms. He babbled and wept for a minute as she stroked his hair. I stayed a good 15 feet away, keeping both them and the woods the freak had retreated into in plain view. Her form grew more and more stiff with each word from Trenton's lips until she said, "Did he say anything to you specifically, Trent?" He nodded and said weakly, "He offered me candy and to see his little puppy." Her chest rose and fell heavily as she squeezed him tightly. "Go sit in the car, honey. We'll be right next to it, okay?" I lamely raised my hand and waved at him as he got in the passenger seat. He waved back and clutched the bag of Skittles tightly, his small face a frown of sadness and tiredness. Miss Waters now approached me, her eyes locked onto me, studying me. "Thank you for taking care of Trent." I smiled, not an ounce of my usual charm present. "He's a good kid. I hope he's okay." Her eyes didn't leave mine. "The man, what did he say to my son?" I stopped, taken aback, Trenton's answer now finally registering, as well as his answer to the creepy fuck. "Horrible things. Fucking awful. Terrible shit I don't want to repeat, but..." I glanced at Trenton. She intoned, "That's not what he heard though, right?" My brow furrowed deeply. No, he didn't hear what he said. I didn't even think about it at the time, because I was processing what that evil prick was saying. I looked at her. "How did you know I heard something different?" She didn't answer, but took a step back and sighed deeply. "You have absolutely no idea how grateful I am to you. You were there when I failed miserably to protect him. Thank you. Thank you so much." I thought back to my pathetic flailing of the knife in its face. I've never felt more useless in my entire life. Her lips pulled into a frown. If you weren't there to protect my son, I would have never seen him again. Remember that. Her words didn't bring me any solace. Only a deep unease as I thought of the implications of her words. She knew that thing. She knew what it was capable of. I sincerely hope that Trenton is still safe. I hope he never heard that tapping of fingers again. I hope that he stays a kid for as long as he can. My wife's obsession is scaring me. Everything was completely normal until last year. We had what felt like a totally typical marriage. I remember the night things started to get weird because it was right after our 5th wedding anniversary. It was a regular day, working at the bank, when I got a text from my wife. A text from her in the middle of the day was not unusual, but what the text said was definitely not like my wife. "Hey babe, I had an idea for something new we could try when you get home." Now, don't get me wrong, I was thrilled to get this text in the middle of my workday. I think any man would be ecstatic at a text like that, but I was having a hard time getting too excited because something about it felt so off. My wife has never been the kind of woman to send a message like this, let alone want to try something new. She is a very shy and to herself woman. The day moved at a snail's pace as I anticipated what my wife had in store for me. I tried not to overhype it in my head. I prepared myself to find a baked good or something when I walked into the house. I fully believed she didn't mean to send a winky face. Not to say I would have been disappointed with whatever she had in store. I'm not much of a wild guy myself, but a little spice never hurt anyone, right? When I pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see most of the house lights were off. I suspiciously unlocked the front door to see my beautiful wife standing facing away from me in the doorway to the bedroom. My happiness from seeing her quickly grew into confusion when she didn't turn around to look at me when I walked in and said her name. She would normally run up to me and give me a big hug. In the past, my wife has always been the sweetest person I've ever known. For her to not run up and give me a hug and a kiss was strange. I made my way inside after waiting a second, trying to be as loud as possible in the hopes she would suddenly notice I was home and look at me. I got closer and noticed she wasn't moving other than her soft breaths. I was standing right behind her and tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" Right as I got out my words, she jumped around to face me with a giggle and smile. "Ha! That was so funny. Did I scare you?" she said, while covering her mouth in an attempt to hide her toothy laugh. "Yeah, I guess you really did scare me," I replied with a nervous chuckle. "So, was that your special surprise you talked about?" "Of course not, silly. That was just the beginning of the fun," she remarked with a smirk and a wink. She grabbed my hand and led me into our bedroom. Under normal circumstances, I would have been over the moon about it, but her scaring me just before leading me into the bedroom felt so off-putting. Did she think this would turn me on somehow? Did one of my buddies reach out to her and tell her to do this? All I knew was that I was not interested in whatever romantic endeavors my wife had planned. I never thought I would say that. As we got to the bed, she pulled back all the covers and told me to lie down. I honestly felt like telling her I had a headache or something, but it was clear she had been thinking about this all day, and I really didn't want to discourage my wife from initiating things in the future. My mind was spinning with thoughts of what she might do next, but she did something I didn't expect. She put the covers back over me and tucked me in. I was both relieved and more confused than ever. She gave me a soft smile, then in one fast motion, fell to the ground like a sack of wet hammers. I intuitively sat up and leaned over the side of the bed to make sure she was okay, and was only met with the ends of her long brown hair peeking out from the bottom of the bed. "Hey, Catelyn, why are you hiding? Can you please come out? I'm not a fan of this game you are playing." I murmured in a tone trying to not sound freaked out. I was only met with the sound of a muffled giggle. I sat in bed for the next 10 minutes trying to tell her to stop. It went from polite asking to begging, but the laughter didn't stop. After my begging didn't seem to work, I got the courage to get out of bed and look beneath me. As soon as I put my foot down, she grabbed my ankle. "What the hell, Catelyn? This isn't funny. You have fun here. I'm sleeping on the couch." I slammed the bedroom door behind me and curled up on the living room couch. I could still hear her laughing from the joke I seemed to miss. It was so hard to sleep that night. The image of her hair barely peeking out from under the mattress really stuck in my head for some reason. It took a while, but I finally fell asleep. The next morning I was up for work a couple hours before her, so we didn't get the chance to talk. I had to go into the bedroom to get my clothes for work, so I peeked under the bed to check on her. She was sleeping peacefully on her stomach, and I tried not to wake her. It was a long, hard day at work. I wasn't really feeling all that scared anymore, more so worried for my wife. I wasn't sure how I could help. Around 10 a.m. I got a text from her. "Hey Emmett, I'm really sorry about last night. I have a lot of explaining to do once we both get home. Can we talk over some pizza?" I felt so much better after reading those words. It might seem insignificant, but my wife hates pizza. So whenever she is willing to eat it with me, I know she is putting in the effort. It was the end of the day, and I headed home looking forward to some pizza and some time with my hopefully back to normal wife. I walked through the door and was relieved to see my wife setting the table and putting down a pizza box. She heard the door shut and ran to give me a hug and a kiss. I really felt like I had my wife back. "I'm so glad you are home. Sit down, I got pizza from your favorite place down the road," she said as she pulled a chair out for me to sit down. We were both quiet for a minute or two after we both sat down. I don't think either one of us knew how to start the conversation. Just as I was about to speak up, she started to talk. "So, I know last night was weird. I just got really insecure after hearing a few of my coworkers talk about the things they do with their partners, and I was worried you thought I was too boring. I know I can be shy and don't like to do anything crazy, and started to feel guilty for not doing more with you. I wasn't entirely sure how to even go about it or what you would like, so I just went for it. I understand now how I went wrong. I'm sorry, I just don't know how to do this kind of thing," she said, as if she had rehearsed it many times in her head. "Why would you ever think I was bored of you? I don't need any of that wild stuff. I married you for a reason. You don't need to try to be something you're not. I love you for who you are," I said as I grabbed her hand. She took a deep breath and looked at me with watery eyes. "I love you too. Thank you for being so understanding. I really want to make it up to you." "That's very kind, but the pizza is enough for me." "No, I'm really serious. I did some more research and found a few good ideas," she said as she put her hand on my thigh. I was so torn at that moment. I was terrified from the night before, but it seemed like she learned from her mistakes. Sure, it was an incredibly strange mistake to think scaring me would get me in the mood, but she is extremely sheltered. That's what I was trying to tell myself. I knew deep down something was still wrong, and I should just say no, but I think many people can understand how your body can go on autopilot in moments like this. At this point, nothing was going to stop me, and I'd give every excuse in the book as to why it was okay to let her do her thing. Just like last time, I was led to our bed. She made me lay down and immediately put my hands over my head into handcuffs and put a blindfold on me. My heart was racing at this point. I was terrified, but human nature was taking over and it could not be overridden. Right as she put the blindfold on me, she stepped back and I didn't hear her move. I was expecting her to do something to me, but nothing. I laid on the bed feeling more exposed than I ever felt possible. After a couple minutes, I heard the floor squeak, and it confirmed that she had been standing right by the bed the whole time. I felt like I could feel her eyes staring at me. It was practically burning a hole in my skin. I heard the light switch flick off. Now, I really couldn't see anything. After a few moments of anticipation, I felt her fingertips graze the sheets near my sides, then by my feet, just barely missing any part of my body. I started to maybe get hope again that I shouldn't be scared. Sure, this wasn't what I had in mind, but she was new to this. I was very wrong. That was the last moment I had hope for my wife. This was teasing. This was torture. I was soon met with the sound of her scraping her fingernails against the walls like a wild animal. She moved around the room, scratching anything she could find, along with a brief giggle here and there. It was like she was silently moving from corner to corner. I would hear her make the awful scraping. Then it would stop for a second. Then I would be jump scared by her doing the same thing in a different spot. It made my skin crawl like I had a million little bugs crawling on the inside of my skin. I wiggled violently, trying to get out of the restraints or to get the blindfold off, but I was trapped. It kept getting worse as the night went on. She kept getting right by my ear. Sometimes she would just breathe, and other times she would let out a giggle. She would run her hands closer and closer to my body, sending me into a cold sweat. I, of course, didn't have a way of telling the time, but I would guess it was about an hour in when I stopped begging her to let me go, and I just started yelling for help. I guess she didn't like that because she put duct tape over my mouth. Shortly after that, I started to hear the scraping sound on the ceiling. Our bedroom has an extremely high ceiling, so I had a hard time imagining how she was doing it. I couldn't believe the situation I was in. It felt like a terrible nightmare. I kept thinking any minute I would wake up next to my gorgeous wife, sleeping soundly beside me. But the nightmare lived on. My wrists felt raw and bloodied. My neck was sore from moving it back and forth trying to get the blindfold off. My whole body ached from trying to free myself. But all that paled in comparison to the psychological torture my wife was putting me through. Not being able to see her next move, and not knowing how far she was going to go, killed me inside. Before I knew it, I was waking up the next day, still tied up and blindfolded like the night before. But I didn't hear my wife around. I didn't let my guard down, however. I knew she could just be waiting for me to relax, then jump out and scare me again. After wiggling my head around for a bit, I finally got the blindfold off. I was honestly scared to open my eyes. I was terrified that my wife would be standing in the corner, waiting for me to look at her. Luckily, when I opened my eyes, she was nowhere to be found, but the relief was brief after seeing the aftermath of my bedroom. Nearly every square inch was scratched, even on the 20-foot ceiling above my head. Some of the scratches even had blood in them. As I looked around at my ruined room, I heard my phone buzzing on the bedside table. Either I put it there before getting into bed, or my wife put it there. At this point, it didn't matter, but having my phone near me could be a saving grace. I figured it was my boss calling me since it was 10 a.m., and I wasn't at work. I wasn't sure if my wife had any plans of coming back to get me, but maybe if I didn't show up to worse, my boss would get worried about me and come looking for me. I soon had the realization that if they called my emergency contact, it would just be my wife, and I wasn't sure how helpful she'd be at this point. I laid down in my bed the rest of the day, miserable as I watched the hours go by, my stomach growling and my arms were sore from them being above my head for the last 24 hours. It was around 9 p.m. when my phone started getting calls like crazy. I remembered I had plans to get dinner with my brother, and he was probably worried about me. I am not the kind of person to just bail. After a couple hours of calling, I heard a few knocks at the door followed by my brother's voice. It was muffled, but I could tell he was worried. I heard keys start to wiggly in the doorway. He had a set of keys in case I lost my pair and needed to get in the house. He opened the door and yelled out my name as I tried to be as loud as possible, thrashing my body around as I tried to scream out the duct tape that was nearly off my face. "Emmett? What the hell, dude?" my brother yelled, and he ran to my aid. He immediately ripped the duct tape off my face. "Oh my gosh, thank goodness you are here. Get me out, now." "Damn, dude, I didn't think you and Catelyn were down bad like that." "Nice," my brother said with a smirk. "Daniel, this is not the time. Get me out," I said with more aggression. Okay. Hang on," he murmured as he tried to get the cuffs off. After trying for a while, we found it impossible to get them off without a key. He ended up just getting my bolt cutters and cut them off. It was nearly midnight when I was finally out. My arms were so sore, it took me forever just to get them back down at my sides. "So, do you want me to pretend I didn't see any of this or something?" Daniel said in a casual tone. "What? No, it's not what it looks like. Trust me. I wish it was what it looks like. Catelyn is sick or something. She trapped me here all night and practically tortured me. Look, I know we are close and all, but I don't think I need those kinds of details from my own brother," he remarked with a chuckle. "You aren't listening to me. Look at the walls and the ceiling. She did this. She is scaring me. I don't know what to do." He looked around the room and then at the ripped-apart ceiling, not fully grasping the situation, but clearly concerned. "Okay, come stay with me tonight if you are freaked out," he said, half annoyed and half worried. I grabbed a few pairs of clothes out of the closet and shoved them in a bag. I wasn't sure how long I was going to be gone, but I wanted to be prepared. My brother only lives a few minutes down the road, so it was an easy drive. The whole time I was worried my wife was going to appear and scare me. We made it inside my brother's house, and he apologized for not having a guest bed. He's in his early 20s and lives alone, so he doesn't have much space, but honestly, I didn't want to be far away from him. I didn't dare to tell my little brother I needed him, and I was scared, but I think he could tell I wasn't okay. "Listen, I don't really get what is going on, but it's getting really late and we both should sleep. Let me know if you need anything," he said as he awkwardly walked into his room 10 feet away from the couch I was lying on. I had a terrible time falling asleep that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I just heard the sounds of her nails scraping the walls in my head. I kept thinking, and I felt her warm breath against my ear. I'd open up my eyes to find the room empty. It was starting to feel like the anticipation of her was becoming just as bad as her actually torturing me. I woke up the next morning exhausted. My whole body felt like I was just in a car accident from being so tense for so long, and I only got 3 hours of sleep. I realized that if life was still normal, my wife would make me hot tea and a warm bath with all her fancy essential oils that probably do nothing, but she always puts so much love into it. I started to feel myself slip. I felt sadness creeping in, but none of that mattered. I had to go to work. I couldn't have a no-call, no-show, and then call out of work the next day. I would feel terrible about it. Plus, I wanted to apologize to my boss in person. The workday started out strange when I tried to ask forgiveness from my boss, but he acted strange at my apology. He explained that my wife gave him a call and said I wasn't feeling well, and I would be absent from work that day. I guess despite everything, my wife still didn't want me to get a slap on the wrist at work. That was only the beginning of the strange day. I found a dead rat in my desk drawer, spiders in my locker, and a huge clump of hair in my lunch. It seemed like I was the only employee being harassed, but they ended up closing and sending everyone home at around 3 p.m. because a few higher-ups got nervous and thought they needed to look into it. Banks tend to take stuff like this seriously. I went out to my car to leave for the day and was in shock to find a note on my car. Did that do it for you? Catelyn. I knew it was her. I just didn't want to believe it. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was talk to the woman. I was terrified at this point, but I had to beg her to stop. For some reason, she thought I had some weird kink for being scared. Or maybe she developed one? Regardless, I had to tell her if it didn't stop, I was going to leave her, or even get a restraining order. I didn't want to meet her in person by myself. I didn't know what stunt she would try and pull to convince me to give her one more chance. Since my brother was already partly up to date on the situation, I asked him if he would be there for our meeting. It might be awkward, but I needed him. I didn't want to involve more people than necessary. I texted them both individually and told them to meet me at a coffee shop that night. It was 7 p.m. and my brother was already sitting next to me, waiting for my wife to walk in. As she walked in, it was clear she was putting on an act. She looked overly sad and was dressed in bright clothes that she'd never worn in the past, trying to make herself look innocent. She pulled out a chair and sat down at our table. The air was thick and awkward. "Catelyn, I wanted to meet in person and have Daniel here because I need you to know whatever you are pulling here isn't what I want. I'm not enjoying whatever act you are putting on. I'm not turned on. I don't find it sexy. Whatever you want to call it, please stop. If this is something you are into, I think we need to talk to a professional because it's scaring me," I said earnestly as her eyes got watery and Daniel slouched in his chair uncomfortably. I don't know what to say, babe. I have to say I'm confused. I know I'm new to this experimenting thing, but I'm doing my best. This is what you asked of me. I'm just trying to be a good wife. You know me, I'm as vanilla as they come. You are the one who asked me about these acts. I'm just doing my best. She stressed as she fought back tears. Daniel looked at me with confused eyes. Wait, hang on. What's going on? I didn't think you asked for any of this, Emmett, Daniel said. I didn't! I swear. I have no idea what she is talking about. I would never ask anything like that from her. I pleaded to my brother. You are sick. You know that? Why are you doing this to me? She uttered as she pulled out an envelope and tossed it on the table. Daniel and I looked at each other before he reached for it and opened it up. Inside was a letter that Daniel read out loud. Dear Catelyn, I love you with all my heart, but I'm afraid I'm getting bored of the same old, same old. I want something more. I am writing this out as I might feel weird saying it face to face. But I've been thinking about it, and well, nothing gives me a high quite like when I am scared. And I mean, truly terrified. The adrenaline rush is like nothing else. I think if we employ this into our lives, it would really spice things up. In the everyday and in the bedroom. I hope you understand and don't get put off by this, but I really, really want it. Under no circumstance, if I say, stop, should you stop. If I tell you I'm too scared, you know you are doing something right. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Emmett. He lowered the note to look at me, only finding shock on my face. What the hell, dude? Why would you do this to your wife and get me involved? This is so messed up and gross. Don't get me involved in your sick kinks ever again, he said as he threw the note at me and stormed out of the coffee shop. I begged him not to leave, but he didn't even turn around. I sat and stared at my wife, terrified. What on earth is going on here? You and I both know I didn't write that garbage, I angrily whispered to her. Her face slowly morphed from sad to a satisfied grin. Stop it! Stop it! I don't like this. Why don't you realize I hate what you are doing? I cried. When will you realize everything isn't always about you? Maybe I'm the one who likes it, she said as she lifted her eyebrows. Stop! You are scaring me, I begged. Good. Then it's working, she said as she pushed her chair back and stood up. She turned around and looked like she was going to leave. Just as she was about to open the door, she stopped. She turned back around and looked at me. She slowly walked back toward me and picked up the note my brother threw. She grinned at me smugly as I trembled in fear. She leaned down to my ear and whispered, "I guess I did a good job imitating your handwriting, huh?" she said as I remained frozen in my seat. I watched as she walked out, got in her car, and left, not knowing what to do next. She turned my own brother against me. This wasn't a miscommunication or something. She was doing this on purpose. She was torturing me. But why? It couldn't be just because she was bored of everyday life. Something was wrong. I knew my brother wouldn't want me back at his place. He saw what looked to be proof of me being a nasty scumbag. I wouldn't be able to convince him otherwise. I went to a hotel for the night. I didn't have other options. I didn't want to burden anyone else with this. Plus, I figured she'd just turn them against me too. After what felt like the longest day of my life, I was in my hotel bed trying to relax. I got a text from my boss letting me know they had to close the bank for the next couple of days because they were doing an investigation. I felt some relief from this. At least I didn't have to worry about work for a day or two. I don't remember much of that night, but I do remember the outcome of the early morning. I remember feeling cold and wet. I opened my eyes to see I was in the woods and lying in a very shallow grave. Most of my body was above ground with a small pile of dirt on top of me. I was frozen in fear. The fear of my wife lurking around somewhere. It seemed like she tried to bury me alive, but did a half-assed job. I tried looking around in the dark forest to try and get my bearings, but only found more confusion and dread. The cold morning wind whistling around me added to my looming fear, as if it was taunting me, but it didn't scare me nearly as badly as my wife. I looked around for her to try and find her, but only got more and more worried when I didn't see her. I heard the sound of twigs snapping from every side. Eventually, I heard a grinding, clicking sound. It sounded robotic, but also human. Then it turned into a giggle. I never thought the sound of my wife's giggle would haunt me so feverishly. The sound would come from far to the right, then switch to my left. Faster than she would have been able to get that far, much like she did in our bedroom a couple nights back. I started to hear footsteps along with the twigs breaking. I swore it didn't sound like she was walking on 2 feet but on all fours. I tried not to think about it. I told myself my mind was playing tricks on me. I shook my head back and forth in an attempt to shake the visions out of my head. I found the strength in me to get to my feet and to run. I noticed what looked like the right direction to move in, based on the ground being disturbed, like she dragged me through the dirt to the spot I woke up in. After running for a few minutes, the trail looked familiar. I knew I was close to home. When I would hear the footsteps, I would turn my head to look, only to barely miss her. After what felt like forever, I saw her. She was on all fours circling me, running like a wild animal, her tongue sticking out of her mouth like a dog. I hardly recognized her. Her circles around me got tighter and tighter. As she got closer to me, she slowed down. Eventually, she got right in front of me and stood up on her 2 legs. I tried to run around her, but before I knew it, she pinned me down. I could barely recognize her up until this point, but something clicked when she got close to me. I looked into her eyes, but I didn't see my wife. I saw something else. I guess I should have guessed sooner, but something was wrong with my wife, because this thing wasn't my wife. "What did you do with her?" I yelled in her face. "You will never find her," she whispered with a hoarse voice, as droll started to come out of her mouth. She abruptly jumped off of me and scurried back into the woods. The last words she said echoed in my head. "You will never find her." The relief I felt knowing my wife might still be out there, but how was I supposed to find her? I couldn't keep up the running my whole way home, but managed to sprint. I I kept thinking she was gone. Then I would hear her nearby, taunting me. I got back to our house. I hadn't been there since this all started happening a couple days ago, so I was scared to see what the inside looked like. I knew I couldn't stay for long. I saw her car still in the driveway, so I planned to take it. My car was still at my hotel, but I needed to make it hard for her to get around. I thought I would also look for clues for my real wife while I was there. After I entered the house, I was shocked to see the state it was in. My wife would rather die than see her home look like this. Glass broken on the ground from wine glasses, dirt and trash in random piles, a foul stench filling my nose. I couldn't believe what that thing did to our once beautiful home. The horrible smell distracted me, but I remembered my goal once I saw some blood. I followed it to the basement staircase. I grabbed the fire poker by our fireplace and walked to the door leading to the basement. I felt guilty for taking so long, and not just heroically running down the steps to hopefully see my wife, but my whole being was so full of dread, I couldn't help but feel fear. I knew I had to fight, but every part of my body wanted to flee. The door creaked as I pushed it open. It was hard to tell if it was louder than normal or if the moment made it feel excruciating. I peered through the door to see more blood on the stairs. A lot of blood. I ran down as fast as I could without slipping, noticing blood on the guardrails as I tried to grab them. As I made it to the bottom of the steps, I was in shock. I saw my wife. She laid on the cold, unfinished basement floor. Her breath was visible, but faint, covered head to toe in cuts and scrapes. I ran to her and collapsed beside her, weeping like a baby. Catelyn, please get up. Come on, we need to get you out of here. You need help, and I don't want her to find us, I said with a panicked breath. What's going on? Was I sleeping down here? Wow, my head hurts, she whispered in a groggy voice. No time for that now. I'm getting you some help, I proclaimed as I lifted her up in my arms with a sudden burst of adrenaline. It was clear from her injuries she needed medical attention, but I wasn't worried for her life. There is no way the amount of blood I saw in the house was all from her. If it was all hers, she'd be on the verge of death. That awful creature must have gotten some blood somewhere else to scare me more. As if the sight of my wife on the floor was grisly enough. We rushed to the hospital in what felt like record time. As I carried her in, the hospital staff approached us, asking all kinds of questions. I tried my best to explain, but it didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. I couldn't explain any of it because I was still trying to understand it myself. The staff got my wife set up in a hospital bed. She had an IV for some fluids and some stitches here and there. After a couple hours, she seemed to perk up, but she could tell I wasn't being myself just yet. Babe, I know you are freaked out, but don't be so cold to me. I just went through something awful. Please, I need you now more than ever, my wife said from her bed across the dimly lit room. I was trying to be as loving as possible, but I just couldn't get some images out of my head. I was desperately trying to remember my wife before that monster came into the picture, but it was so hard. Her face went from sad to an over-exaggerated pout, in an attempt to make a sad puppy dog face. She tried to make the cutest faces she could. I got closer and closer to her, and her happiness grew. I ended up sitting on her bed with her. She leaned close to me and puckered her lips. I gave in and had a blissful kiss with my wife, until she bit down. I tried to pull away, but she had such a grip. I could tell I'd badly hurt my lip if I resisted. Instead, we both sat in silence. Her breathing got slow and deep as my heart rate increased. She slowly loosened her bite, but stayed uncomfortably close to my face. Say a word, and I will scream, she whispered. Before I could process what was happening, she reached for my hand and grabbed my pinky. Then she violently forced it the wrong way. I screamed in pain as I heard the snap of my finger breaking. My ears were ringing in shock. As I reacted, my wife did as well. "Get away from me, you horrible monster! Get off of me! Don't you dare touch me!" She yelled at the top of her lungs. I backed away from her. Confused and shocked, medical staff ran into our room. "What the hell is happening here?" a tall man said. "Sir, thank goodness you are here. My husband is trying to hurt me. He is the one who gave me these injuries. I didn't want to tell anyone because I was too scared he would hurt me even more. Please help me. Now he is trying to hurt me again." She desperately cried. No, do not believe her. Look at what she did to my lip and my finger. I'm the one who needs help. This woman is torturing me," I said, pleading to the staff as a nurse chimed in. "Those look like wounds of a woman defending herself, buddy. Don't play the victim." "No, please, someone has to help me. This isn't my wife. This is a monster. She is manipulating you all." I finished my sentence as 2 large security guards came to take me out. As I left the room, I turned back to look at that thing sitting in the hospital bed. It grinded at me. It was still playing a game, still scaring me to my very core. I made it outside with the 2 security guards, and they helped me into a cop car. As we drove, I saw my whole life falling apart before my eyes. I realized I was probably going to jail. She would find her way to make me seem guilty of abuse, and who knows what else. She would bend the truth. She even had my own brother on her side. Not only did I come to terms with going to jail, but with the fact that my wife was gone. Even if my real wife was still alive, I've been through so much trauma with that monster that I can never see her the same again. At that moment, my whole world was shattered. I felt emotions inside me bubbling up. I felt sadness, pain, anger, all so strong I didn't know what to do. Just as I fought off my tears, I was jolted out of my depression with the cop car swerving off the road suddenly. Every part of my body tensed up as the car flipped and went into a ditch. I was dizzy, but somehow still lucid. I managed to get my seatbelt unbuckled, but soon found myself in an awkward position, just lying in the flipped car waiting for help. The 2 officers in the front seat were passed out. I was pretty sure one of them was dead by looking at him. After lying in the flipped car weighing my options, I saw someone walking around the car. I yelled for help, but my heart sank when I realized it was her. Suddenly, the car that just moments ago made me feel trapped now felt like my saving grace. The only thing separating me and that monster. I did my best to keep my eye on where she was, but she managed to get around too fast. Before I knew it, she reached through the broken window, grabbed my ankles, and ripped me out of the car. I could feel the glass shards ripping at my skin as she forced me out. She got me out and dragged me a couple of feet away from the car. She stood above me, straddling me. Her arms were blooded from pulling me out of the car. She got closer to me slowly, eventually sitting on my chest. As she got close, I could see how bad she looked. Her hair was knotted and ratty. Her skin looked dry and weathered. My whole body ached at the sight of her. If this was my wife, something was really wrong. Wasn't that thrilling? She remakes with a crazed look in her eye. "Stop it! Just stop it! I will leave you and get a restraining order against you. I will do anything in my power to get away from you," I pleaded with her weight on my chest. "Ha! How do you think you'll get away with that? I have everyone on my side. I have written evidence that makes me seem innocent. No one will ever believe you. You are putty in my hands. Is this what you want? For me to go to jail? To make me look like an abusive, sexually corrupt man? Why are you doing this?" I said with desperation. "Go to jail? Who said I wanted you to go to jail? Who do you think stopped the cop car? The Tooth Fairy? she said with a chuckle and twisted smile. Then why did you tell all those lies about me? Why are you trying to make me look guilty, and then the next minute save me? If you go to jail, the chase is over. You will be protected by the jail walls and steel bars that keep us separated. I won't be able to keep scaring you. Jail would be freedom for you. Freedom from me. What if I would rather go to jail than have you constantly lurking around every corner? I said with squinted eyes. She met my gaze and got even closer. She whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. Go to jail and give up finding your beautiful bride. You sick bastard, I said as I tried to sit up to grab her, but she pinned my arms down. You thought, because of the little stunt I pulled, I was making up a lie about your wife still being out there. Don't be silly. You know your wife. She would never act like this. How do I know you aren't bluffing? I said as my eyes filled with hate. Think of it this way. Would you rather keep looking for her your whole life, then on your deathbed realize it was all a lie? Or go to jail and realize on your deathbed that your real wife was alive the whole time, trapped away somewhere, desperately waiting for her knight in shining armor to come to save her? But he never came. What a shame that would be, huh? She uttered with a soft, maniacal tone. Who are you? Why are you doing this? I said as she let go of my wrists and sat up and began to speak in a normal, cheering tone. What do you mean, goofball? I'm your wife. I'm doing it because I love you. I felt even more scared to see her attitude shift so suddenly. I could see what she was trying to do, showing me how she could manipulate me and others. She got off of me and walked a few feet away. More cops will be here soon. I will keep them off your trail so you have time to get away. But don't get too comfy. Wherever you go, I will find you. Once I find you, keep running. I want you to keep having a sense of getting away from me. I want you to feel safe so I can take that feeling away from you again. I rose to my feet, looking at her in awe. I knew I couldn't be completely confident in my real wife, still being alive. But the thought of her in a cold room, waiting for me, echoed through my head. I had to keep running. I had to keep looking, even if that was exactly what she wanted from me. I started to run. I ran with no clue where I was going. I didn't have a home to go to. Nowhere was safe. I was hopeless. I spent the next several months running away. I hitchhiked and found odd jobs. I even found a super sketchy doctor's office that took some cash I had in my wallet. I had to get some help with the injuries I sustained. A few separate times I thought I was safe. I thought I had outrun the police, and more importantly, my wife. The first time I realized she found me, I opened the door to find bloodied teeth all over my doorstep. I was in the next place for about 6 weeks, but kept getting ding-dong ditchers. I thought it was just kids, but no kid would be doing it on the hour every hour for days straight. That brings us to the current day. I won't give details on my location in case she is reading this, however, I'm not completely sure if she has found me or not. Sometimes I hear scraping on the outside of the house or what sounds like something inside my walls. I tell myself it's just animals, because it makes me feel better. She might be trying to be less obvious, so I stop running. I was relieved at first that she wasn't doing anything too terrifying, but then I realized it's worse, to not know if it's her or not. I've been spending most of my time hoping and praying that my real wife is still out there. I can't help but look for her as well as I'd like, given I'm very far from home. I worry that if I just sit around and wait, they will never find her. Not as long as that thing pretends to be my wife. My biggest fear of all is that she is my real wife. Is she giving me false hope so I have a reason to stay out of jail and a reason to live? No, I can't believe that. I will never give up hope. I love you, Catelyn, and I will keep looking for you. I'm an anthropologist digging at one of the oldest archaeological sites in the world. I found something that shouldn't exist. Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, 2024. The excavation has gone smoothly these past 3 weeks, but today we've encountered something so strange that it warranted the creation of this entry you're presently reading. As of this moment, I'm not sure whether or not to officially publish these finds, as I fear for the repercussions it may produce, and I do not wish to tarnish my professional legacy. The reason I'm even writing this entry to begin with is to keep a personal record of these recent events while they're fresh in my mind. But I also intend to post it anonymously to the internet, where it will likely be swept away and disregarded as a hoax or urban legend. I'm fine with that. I just need to get it off my chest. I know it's not rational or even a good idea to share this with strangers, but I just need to tell someone. Maybe someone will know what is going on. Until I have fully decided on whether or not to publish, I will keep this as anonymous as I can. I'm a paleoanthropologist at an esteemed university in the States, and I've been leading a small excavation team here in Tanzania at one of the oldest sites of hominin occupation in the world, Olduvai Gorge. Our excavation site was located on the eastern stretches of the gorge, in a particularly hilly area, as scouted by our surveyors. They chose this spot due to the presence of a series of small and seemingly undiscovered rock shelters hidden away behind thick shrubbery and debris. It is nothing short of a miracle that they were able to be located by our team. Over these past weeks, we have found here an abundance of lithic assemblages, most of them consisting of Oldowan scrapers and cores, but we also found a pair of Acheulean hand axes and a few bifacial points. Deep in one of the rock shelters, we even unearthed the partial remains of what is most likely an Australopithecine upper skull, though further osteological analysis is pending. All seemed to be going well until today, when my lunch break was interrupted by one of my students. I will refer to him as Edward. He came rushing over from the easternmost rock shelter, nearly stumbling over all the pebbles and sticks in his way as he hurried down the hill toward the tents, calling my name. I rose from my seat to greet him, fearing that some sort of accident had happened. "What is it?" I anxiously inquired. I had never seen him this upset. "You gotta come check this out. Right now," he replied enigmatically and ushered me to follow him. I went with him up the hill and into the mouth of the rock shelter. Immediately, I noticed what all the fuss was about. Deep in the innermost end of the rock shelter, past all the excavation tools and equipment, where there had previously been a solid rock wall, there was now a small opening. I saw this small hole next to this big rock, and I just kept digging, and I moved some more rocks, and "Oh, okay. You should have notified me sooner," I said, cutting him off as I ventured deeper into the shelter toward the gaping hole. I feared that, in his eagerness, he may have disturbed an important context. But the thing is, I looked inside it, with my light and whatnot, and I saw these, things. "You better take a look." I crouched down beside the hole and searched my pockets for my flashlight. The opening seemed big enough for someone to crawl into, and as I turned on the light, the shining beam illuminated a massive cavern on the other side, probably big enough to stand in. "Remarkable," I uttered. "Shine your light at the far end walls." "Do you see them?" Edward probed. I did as he had asked me, and as my light moved across the dusty, volcanic rock walls of the chamber, I laid my eyes on something that made my heart skip a beat. First believing it to be merely a trick of the light, I stuck my head deeper into the opening to get a better view. "You see them, don't you?" Edward's voice echoed behind me. Lost for words, I began crawling through the opening, eagerly disregarding any health and safety precautions one would be wise to employ when venturing into such undiscovered cave environments. I heard Edward calling out to me as I did so, begging me to be careful. I scraped up my arms and legs in the process, and as I emerged on the other side, I was completely covered in dust, which I promptly brushed off my rugged clothes as I stood up. On the far end wall were a series of rough carvings onto the rock, carvings in the Latin alphabet, carvings in English. The whole wall was full of them, as if it was a page in a book. Behind me, I heard Edward grunting and shuffling as he made his way through the opening to join me in my astonishment. I scanned the rest of the cavern with my light and saw that the inscriptions continued on the other surfaces and walls of the chamber. Not only that, but I noticed a series of strange artifacts scattered about, seemingly undisturbed for millennia. Among them were several aforementioned Oldowan stone tools and a ring made of mostly pure gold, judging by its pristine condition, as well as some bones randomly strewn around. My immediate thoughts were that the cave must have been used in modern times, perhaps recently. I hadn't yet actually read the content of what was scribbled on the walls, but even still, something about that explanation immediately felt off. The strata next to where the opening had been was undisturbed and had naturally accumulated for millions of years. I should know, because I monitored it closely yesterday when we started digging in that part of the rock shelter. I realize some of you reading this might not be familiar with stratigraphy and thus not fully understand why this would be an issue when regarding the date of the inscriptions, but those well acquainted with the law of superposition should know exactly why this shouldn't be possible. If you don't, I urge you to Google it. But to make a long story short, however, the law of superposition states that geological layers accumulate over time, and that under normal circumstances, the layers that are the oldest are those found further down. Now, assuming the entrance we came in is the only entrance into the cave, and taking into consideration the opening was buried under a dozen stratigraphical layers, it means that it was last sealed around 1 million years ago, at the earliest. Everything about this was strikingly anachronistic, but I saw no other explanation. There seemed to be no other way to enter the cave, and there was no sign of a previous collapse. "What is this, Edward?" I asked him, who was now full of dirt and standing beside me. "Are you pulling my leg here? Is this some kind of elaborate joke?" "No, sir, I promise." "It shouldn't be possible then," I said, pacing back and forth. "Yet, evidently it is," he somewhat snarkily replied. I ignored him. My pacing took me around a slight bend in the cave, and I noticed a heap of what looked like different chunks of various metals. Some seemed to be nearly reduced to dust as a result of deterioration over time, while others looked pretty much to be in pristine condition, although not as shiny as they once probably were. There were also snake-like lines in the sandy floor of the cave, with traces of heavily oxidized copper encompassed within them. Had these once been wires, if they were ever covered in plastic, as most wires today are, it must have broken down millennia ago, leaving no trace. Quite remarkable. "Doc, you should see what's written on these walls." Edward's voice echoed around the bend. "Just a second," I replied, carefully observing this strange assemblage and analyzing it as best as I could. I had never seen anything like it in my life. Was this a machine? "Whoa, like you really need to come right now," Edward again urged me. I emerged from behind the bend to see what all the fuss was about, and when I did, I noticed the dusty visage of Edward looking pale as a ghost. "What's the matter?" I asked, looking at where the beam of his flashlight was illuminating the inscribed wall. "Read what it says," Edward urged me, and so I did. In the following section of this entry, I will recount word for word what was inscribed on those walls. Where there is significant erosion or other obstruction of the text, I have filled in the gaps. From what I interpreted to be the beginning, the upper left corner, it read as follows. "Upon arrival, the machine broke down almost instantaneously. I am the only living Homo sapiens in the world, and there won't be another like me for at least 2 million years. There's an overwhelming hopelessness to it all. There is no hope for me. I have accepted it. These things, these devils, have left me no other choice than to seal myself into this tomb. I can hear them at night digging and scratching." Thus read the first section of the text. Beneath it, The next one read, "My name is Bill Hartnell, and I was born on the 29th of September 2029 in Exeter, England, and this is my full story. I'm stuck in here for the foreseeable future, so I might as well tell my tale in as much detail as I can. I've got nothing better to do to pass my remaining time. Apologies if I don't get to finish it. Writing on this wall is somewhat tedious, however. So I will be concise, forgive me. I studied quantum mechanics at Exxon and graduated with my PhD in 2058. The machine I built subsequently took me 10 years to complete, and was operational by 2068, which is also the year I traveled here. I have now been here for a total of 2 weeks, and fear this may be my last. If you find this message, Patricia, you were both right and wrong. Right in that it would end badly, but wrong in that it wouldn't at least work." The writing ceased as this wall had met with the ground, but it continued on another, larger register to its upper right. "My goal was to travel through time and witness every significant human benchmark in chronological order, starting here with the earliest use of tools, and ending my tour with the 2029 Mars landing launch. But now it seems the beginning of the human story will be the end of mine. There is something else here. Something that doesn't belong. One moment I was in my garage in Exeter, ready to go, and in the next, a blinding white glare surrounded me. And as I opened my eyes, I found myself on the prehistoric African continent. I immediately felt the scorching heat of the sun burn into my skin. And in that moment, I cursed myself for not bringing sun protection. Such an obvious oversight, I thought. My pale British skin would be the death of me. The first thing that stood out to me was how humid it was compared to the present. If my calculations are correct, I should be at the site of Olduvai Gorge, but here there is neither a gorge nor the arid shrubland it is known for. This place is ripe with vegetation and fauna. As I stepped out of the machine, I noticed it had broken, and I dragged it off into a nearby cave for protection until I could get it running again. I spent my first night inside that cave, sheltered from the elements and wildlife, and trying to repair my device. It was a futile effort, as I do not possess the parts necessary for such a repair. Another fatal oversight. My first 4 nights were relatively normal, or as normal as you would expect them to be 2 million years in the past. On my second day, I cautiously ventured outside the shelter, and it didn't take long for me to make contact with the locals. Presumably they are Homo habilis, but it is hard to tell. I am a physicist, not an anthropologist. Seeing them in the flesh is a surreal experience. To think I am the first human to lay eyes on another living human species in 40,000 years is extraordinary. I guess this writing also technically makes for the earliest writing in human history, which is also neat. The other humans first greeted me with a sort of reserved curiosity. They carried in their hands various stone tools and looked bizarre, though to them I probably looked equally strange. If they had the cognitive abilities to form thoughts about religion, I must have resembled a god to them. They let me observe them from a distance and never posed any problems. If anything, they wanted nothing to do with me. I find it ironic how these people live in dwellings constructed between trees and shrubbery out in the open, while it is myself who is living in a cave like some troglodyte. On the 5th night, things got strange. Just as the sun was setting, I was heading back to my cave when I heard my name called out, almost like a faint whisper, coming from the tree line a short distance away. That voice, raspy and out of breath. I had never heard anything like it before. I am positive it was not made by any of the local hominins. I briefly decided to investigate, but when I heard rapid approaching commotion in the bush, I took off. In my terror, I heard the loud snapping of twigs behind me. I ran all the way back to the cave and sealed the medium-sized opening with a makeshift door made out of wood and some rocks. I leaned in and listened intently after any noise, and heard the rustling of some bushes not too far away, accompanied by some kind of raspy vocalization. Nothing else happened that night. The following morning, I saw outside my shelter concentric circles drawn in the sand, but no accompanying footprints. Later that day, I was let into the village of the hominins. There, I traded my phone for some stone tools. I had no use for it anymore. The humans seemed perplexed by it, but were equally enchanted by its reflective surfaces. They allowed me to take some fruits and berries, but would not let me near the game meat, shouting whenever I did so. Despite that, I still can't believe the hospitality they showed me. As the sun was setting, I left the forested shelter of my ancestors and began walking back to the cave. The volume of trees gradually subsided, and I found myself in an open and lush savanna-like environment, but with thick shrubs on either side of the path. Then suddenly, something struck the ground in front of me, nearly hitting me. It was my phone. Confused, I thought the humans had grown tired of it and followed me back in anger. But then something intriguing happened. Another phone struck the ground right next to the first one, clearly of the same make, and clearly identical to the one I had traded hours earlier. But that was impossible, as I had only brought one. Then another flew out from a nearby bush, hitting me in the arm. I looked around, scanning the bushes, but I saw nothing. I slowly backed up, and when I did so, the bushes rustled for a moment and then stopped. I took another step backward, and the rustling repeated, and once again stopped. It was mimicking me. When I finally made that realization, I once more ran back to the cave at full sprint, quickly sealing the entrance behind me. As I turned on my headlamp, which I still had batteries for, I noticed something drawn on the sandy floor of the cave. It was another concentric circle, identical to the one outside this morning. I was too horrified to sleep, but eventually my tiredness gave in, and I drifted off. I spent the next day teaching myself how to hunt. Though I had some food rations from modern times back in the cave, eventually I would need to learn how to hunt if I were to survive out here, I figured. I had tried in the morning to hunt some lizards and birds with the stone weaponry I acquired the day prior, but with little success. I couldn't survive on berries and fruits alone, so I decided that the only way to get some protein around these parts would be to accompany a hunting party. I waited outside the village until the men left for their daily hunt, but as I approached them, they angrily detested my presence, denying my company. They waved their arms at me, ushering me to keep a distance, so for the rest of the day, I did exactly that. I lived in their shadow, observing but never interrupting their hunt. The following hours were spent watching the H. habilis hunt some local megafauna. Among them was an animal that is now extinct, therefore I do not know its name, but it resembled some kind of elephant. As I, from a distance, watched my early ancestors secure the kill and slice off chunks of meat with their stone scrapers, the most eerie thing occurred. About 9 of the humans stood gathered around the elephantine creature when suddenly something pale sprinted out from the nearby tree line. It was bipedal and double the height of the other men. The thing was certainly humanoid in shape, but this was definitely no primitive hominin. Its marble white flesh glistened in the sun as it ran full force toward the dead animal. The hunters quickly noticed it and scattered, some even leaving behind their stone tools. The figure ran up to the elephant and began eating, tearing the animal's flesh off with its hands. It gorged itself on the meat and suddenly stopped. I laid low in the bush about 100 meters away, eagerly watching in terrified amazement. It was hard to make out details at such a distance, but what I saw next I am certain of. The thing slowly reared its head and looked directly at my direction. I'm not sure if it saw me or not, but I could feel its piercing gaze. The wall of text ended, and Edward and I had to round a slight corner in the room to get to the next section. It was also during this time that he spoke out for the first time. "Do you think this could be real?" he asked gently, almost concerned. "I mean, you saw the strata. There couldn't possibly have been anyone else here for millions of years." "I don't know, Eddie. Let's just keep reading and find out." I answered nonchalantly back, pretending like this didn't deeply unsettle me too. Truth is, I was beginning to get highly unnerved. My initial scientific awe had now shifted into an uncertain angst. The inscriptions continued. I haven't seen sunlight since the 10th day. That's when I saw them clearly. I had spent that day harvesting fruits and berries alongside the local hominin population. They let me follow them back into their village, where we quite literally enjoyed the fruits of our labor. Again, this level of hospitality was wholly unexpected for such a primordial species of human. All was going well, but as it was beginning to get dark, I was frantically ushered out of their encampments. I thought this weird, but decided to shrug it off as a cultural thing, if they even had such a concept. Heading back to my cave, the sun was setting on the horizon, and just as I was nearing the mouth of the cave, a looming shadow stretched across the ground in front of me, blocking out the last rays of light from the evening sun. Someone or something was standing high above the rocky outcrop. The cave was situated beneath, casting an oppressive shadow. I looked up and saw the dark silhouette of a person. With the bright backdrop of the sunset, it was hard to make out any features, but I could tell that whatever was standing there was not one of the local hominins. When it understood that I had seen it, it began climbing down, scurrying on all fours across the rocky surfaces. Frightened, I hurried inside the cave and quickly grabbed the makeshift door and pushed it into the opening to block it. The door was more like a plug, fashioned out of a large boulder and some wooden sticks and thatch. But before I had sealed the entrance completely, I looked out of the opening one last time, and that's when I laid my eyes clearly on them. There were 4 of them, walking slowly towards the opening from about 10 meters away, now fully upright. The sheer terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. They were all ghastly pale, their flesh smooth and spotless. They stood at probably 2 meters tall, and they had neither any body hair nor any reproductive organs or nipples. The word that comes to mind when describing them is embryonic. They were featureless in all aspects, except the most harrowing. They, all of them, had my face. They looked like me. Hairless, sure, but still nearly identical. The foremost of them opened its mouth and stretched out its hand and said in perfect English, "You don't belong here." That was the last I saw of them before sealing the cave completely. I quickly reinforced the door plug with any rocks and boulders I could find in the cave, and so far, it has been effective. I have now been here for God knows how long. I still have enough supplies to last me several days, and enough batteries to continually power my headlamp for at least another day or two. But I hear them. They are outside. They haven't left me ever since that frightful evening. Sometimes they take breaks, but never long enough for me to deem it safe to leave this place. For all I know, it might be a trick to lure me out. It's only a matter of time before they break in. Their cries echo throughout the cavernous walls. This writing will be my only lasting legacy. Therefore, I hope I have provided sufficient detail to be of some use in some way or another. This is my punishment. These devils, I know what they are. They are my lack of hubris manifest. I foolishly thought the laws of time and space were mine to conquer, however, fate would not allow it. Perhaps rightfully so. Oh, how terribly, terribly sorry I am. Patricia, I'm truly sorry. I should have listened. End of text. Or well, not quite. The inscriptions continued beyond this, but they were of a different character. I won't reproduce the contents of the last wall, but I can tell you what it consisted of. The blueprints for Bill's machine, and a plea to be saved. The power of time was now figuratively in the palm of my hand. I'm not saying I fully believe everything that was written, but on the off chance there may be some truth to it, I choose to keep this DIY recipe a secret. I walked over to the golden ring that adorned the cave floor and picked it up. It too was inscribed with the initials B and P. I pocketed it and asked Edward, "Where is his skeleton then?" "What do you mean?" he replied. "His bones. If he withered away in this cave, they should have been here. There are some bones here. Over there as well," he said and pointed across the cave. "I know, I saw them. But they don't make for a complete skeleton, do they?" I replied. "I suppose not." Edward acquiesced, aware of the implications. "This place is giving me the creeps." I spoke, suddenly getting an intense surge of paranoia. "What do you say we head back soon?" I whipped out my phone camera and took several pictures of the inscribed walls and artifacts within the cave. Both Eddie and I agreed it was time to head back to assess the situation and where we would go from here. We agreed also not to tell the rest of the excavation crew for the time being. I am sitting inside my tent now, an hour till midnight, and writing up this entry. In the time that passed since leaving the cave, and now I have meticulously examined the photos I took, but I dare not step inside that cave again. Something inside me desperately wants to seal it again, and I regret not doing so, as I think we may have committed a grave mistake. About an hour ago, our field assistant, Lila, came to me in my tent, voicing her concern about something. When she described what had gotten her worried, my blood ran cold. She had asked about why there were concentric circles drawn in the sand all around our encampment. When I heard this, I rushed outside with my flashlight in hand, and I saw them with my own eyes. The whole crew was gathered outside, gawking at the strange markings. In the small crowd of anthropologists and excavators, I locked eyes with Edward, and without speaking a word, I knew what was on his mind. I fear we may have unknowingly unleashed something ancient. But how? There were no passages leading further into a deeper cave system that I could see. It was an enclosed chamber, albeit very dark and with many corners. Could it mean that whatever it is we have unleashed was inside the room with us this entire time? I shudder at the thought. I think it's best I finish up this entry now. There has been an increase in whispers and unrest in the camp this past hour, so I better tend to it and try to get this situation under control. Any tips or advice to make this make sense is appreciated. If what we discovered today really is true, which I am now more inclined to believe, then our common ancestors weren't alone all those millions of years ago, and it might possibly turn out that we aren't either. I joined a run club after a string of disappearances in my neighborhood. What I found was terrifying. I decided on a whim to join my local run club. A flyer on a lamppost in my neighborhood gave me the idea. A ragged thing, nestled among the missing person posters, boasting that all paces were welcome, even absolute beginners. An optional gathering at a bar afterwards. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd normally be interested in. You see, I've been running for 2 decades now, placed among the first at a handful of smaller races. I'm fast, very fast, and that sort of training is usually a solitary endeavor. I arrived early, where a handful of people were gathered in a small plaza by the river. The run club's members chatted amongst themselves. Old friends. I tried to look for any other person who was standing awkwardly to the side like I was, but there were none, even as more people arrived. I stuck out like a sore thumb, dressed in performance leggings and reflective gear, while everyone else practically wore flat-soled sneakers. I received glances from some of them, looking me up and down, hungrily devouring my embarrassment. Eventually, a man took pity on me. He was dressed just like I was, another person who actually took the lifestyle seriously. And honestly, he didn't look half bad. That's hard to pull off in a day-glow orange compression tank top. He introduced himself as James, the leader and organizer of the club. We chatted for a few minutes about races we've competed in, our pace time, and which shoes we favored. He told me he started the club after the random disappearances began happening in the area around last year. Turns out, people feel a lot safer running in a group rather than alone on the street. He'd gotten to make a lot of friends and explore the neighborhood. And he leaned in with a wink. He had gotten to meet some very interesting people. He turned around, just in time to miss me blush, to announce the warm-up stretches to the group. I was already planning our first date in my head as we worked through knee races and quad extensions. And then it was time to run. We had gone over the route briefly, but I missed most of it. I had better things to think about anyway, like Dayglow James. I figured I'd just follow the crowd. That turned out to be quite difficult. After the first 2 blocks of running, I realized I was a block ahead of everyone else. Even James. Hard to follow those who are behind you. I doubled back and slowed to a crawl to keep pace with the group. Runs taken at a slower pace were also important for training, I reminded myself. Plus, I'd be able to keep my breath steady enough to have a conversation with James. He had announced he would be staying towards the back of the group to make sure no one got left behind. At first, we took a route I was familiar with, a few minutes along the waterfront before turning in to run in the neighborhood. We passed a deli, the post office, a convenience store. We made a left down an unfamiliar street, one I hadn't seen before, despite living in the neighborhood for over 5 years. There was a dilapidated church on each corner, towering and decrepit and covered in vines, and the sidewalks had seen better days. "I don't think I've been this way before," I said to James. He nodded. "Not surprising," he said between breaths. "It's not exactly pretty here. I run this way because the streets are totally empty. Don't want to crowd a busy sidewalk." He was beautiful, his dark hair catching the subsiding light in just the right way. As we passed between the churches, I imagined my own church wedding with him. We were now passing warehouse after abandoned warehouse. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows. I was beginning to see my exhalation in the air, and I zipped up my vest preemptively, bracing for the cold. No one was chatting anymore, but James and I, all of them too out of breath. All that was audible was the thump-thump of our shoes hitting the pavement. No cars, no other pedestrians. Our numbers sounded light. I looked around at the group. "James," I said, "I think we lost a few people." "Yeah, probably. Sometimes the newcomers give up part way through the run and turn back. Sometimes their pace is just too slow, and they have to find the way on their own. You know how it is." "Oh," I said, "I thought you stayed at the back of the group so everyone could keep up." He smiled. "You know how it is," he said again. Down the block, 2 large buildings on either side of the street grew larger as we approached them. The 2 old churches. But it was impossible. We hadn't once turned since we started running in the industrial area. There was no way we could have been approaching them from the same way we initially had. Perhaps I was distracted. I accepted it and kept moving past the graffitied warehouses. "I live around here, you know," said James. "Yeah? In a warehouse?" "You could call it converted. You could call it illegal," he said, smiling. "Sounds like I couldn't call it cozy," I replied. He laughed. "No, you certainly couldn't. You know what the worst part of it is? It's really annoying to get food. No delivery options. Not any that suit our dietary restrictions. You train too, you must understand my pain." I smiled. "I know how it is." We fell silent and kept running. I looked around and realized there were fewer people still, bringing us to around 15 total. "Maybe we should slow down. People seem to have trouble keeping up," I said. He shook his head. I understood. We could not possibly be going any slower. I felt a fondness for him. He was doing a service to the community by providing a safe space to run. If people couldn't actually run, that wasn't his fault. And yet, slowly, we approached something looming in the distance. The 2 churches. Again. Come to think of it, we had been going for at least 2 miles. If we really had been running in a straight line, we should by now have hit the highway underpass about a mile inland from the river we came from. And yet it was nowhere in sight either. not even in the distance. "We passed these before," I said as we ran between the crumbling churches. "A lot of them in the area, I guess," he said. But something in the way he spoke gave me pause. His tone was no longer conversational. In fact, it sounded defensive, as if he knew exactly what I was talking about. I was in danger. The sun was nearly beneath the horizon behind us, the temperature dropping by the minute. For the first time, I looked closely at the other runners. I expected to find them out of breath, possibly even confused like I was. Instead, they ran urgently, intently. The effort they appeared to exert did not match the speed they ran. It looked like they were almost running in place, slow motion only in pace, as if they were charging through deep mud. And every single one of them was crying. They looked far, far in the distance ahead of them, with expressions of absolute terror on their faces, tears streaming down their cheeks. I tried to see what they were looking at, but there was nothing but warehouses. No underpass, no pedestrians, no cars. Nothing. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, but the whites of their eyes looked darkened, giving the appearance that they were completely black. "What's going on?" I asked. "Keep going," whispered another runner. I looked at James. He smiled. "Keep going," he said too, "and stay with the group." "You'll be safe with the group," said another runner. I looked behind us. The sun had set, but the river we had come from was nowhere to be seen. Just miles of warehouses fading into the darkness. The few street lamps lining the sidewalk had flickered on, dousing us in a sodium orange glow. And there were even fewer runners than before still. I could count the lot of us on my hands. 8 people creeping forward like encroaching sludge, yet running as if they were in a 100-meter sprint. I kept running at my slow pace, despite the alarm bells going off in my head. I just had to make it to the corner. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. I still stuck with the group until the last possible second. Then I hit a hard right and tried to turn down another desolate and unfamiliar street. Something caught my arm. One of the runners, holding me firmly by the elbow, dragging me ahead as she sprinted straight ahead at a snail's pace. "You don't want to do that," she said. "Folks who turn off tend to lose their way." I kept running forward, again between the 2 churches, again past the warehouses, again over the broken sidewalks. I was also beginning to tear up, afraid and confused and wanting to go home. My smartwatch told me we had been running for over an hour, but had not logged any distance. I cursed myself for leaving my phone at home. Just 2 blocks later, the ivy-coated churches again. "They're getting closer together," said James in a happy sing-song. "We're almost at the end." Our group was now just 5 runners, including James and I. "Where?" I managed to gasp. I couldn't finish my sentence. "Maybe they got tired," said James lightly. At that, the fear cocooned my ribcage, and I felt a few tears fall down my cheek. I took a look over my shoulder, past the preternaturally slow runners, at the line of garages and warehouses behind us. The dark of night was encroaching, limiting the field of distance. Just at the boundary of my vision, something moved and writhed in the darkness in complete silence. It kept pace with us, ever so slowly, staying at the edge of where I could no longer see into the night. I could barely make out an outline. "Don't look back," said James. "We're so close." I would keep pace with the group. I would keep going straight. But there was no way I wasn't looking back. That thing in the shadows, whatever it was, sent a bolt of electricity up my spine. I had to know what was back there. Brief gleams from the sodium bulbs of the streetlights illuminated small portions of the thing as it passed them. It looked metallic, or wet, or highly reflective. Standing about 7 feet tall and nearly as wide, It moved forward with a tangled mass of twitching vine-like limbs. They swept out, reaching towards us, becoming momentarily visible in the light. It, too, looked like it should have been moving faster than it was. Tendrils reached out, stomped forward, but propelled it just inches at a time. To the side, the runner that had prevented me from turning slowed to a stop and leaned forward, out of breath. As we ran further from her, the thing in the shadow grew closer. I could barely see, but when it reached her, the vines seemed to wrap around her, encasing and swallowing her. I screamed. It was just James and I then. "Keep going," he said. "Stay with me. You'll be okay." This whole time, I had believed I'd be safe with others, not turning, slowing myself down to the speed of the crowd, to the point of aggravation and insanity. And now I was running alone, with a stranger, in the middle of nowhere while being chased by something not of this world. "Is it yours?" I asked him. He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. "You do seem lovely." I acted against my better judgment by coming to the club in the first place, and I was doing it again now by listening to James, running at a crawl. I looked back once more at what was behind me. It was drawing closer now, no doubt about it. Yet it was still barely visible, the darkness creeping closer and concealing it. Soon, we'd be encased in shadow, and it would reach me. I couldn't afford to keep going so slowly, so I sped up. I began to outpace James with ease, running further from the darkness behind us both. I felt him swipe from my arm, trying to pull me back. He missed. James called out after me, "Don't leave me, please, it'll..." He trailed off. For the first time, he sounded afraid. "Go faster," I called back to him. "I can't." One last glance back as I sprinted forward at only twice his speed. His expression was unreadable, devastated and afraid and angry and something else. "I'm starving," I heard him say. The darkness overtook him, and just before I turned back around, I could swear I saw tendrils slithering and constricting around him. I ran forward, faster than ever, a push even for myself. The darkness fell further and further away as I continued down the block of warehouses. On the next corner were the churches again, growing closer and closer as I sprinted toward them. As soon as I passed between them, something shifted in the air. I was no longer surrounded by warehouses, but the blocks of my neighborhood I was familiar with. I was all alone on the abandoned residential street. I looked back, expecting to find darkness and warehouses, but I could see the river plaza we started from only a few short blocks away. My watch read 3:00 a.m. Goosebumps still raised all over my skin. I ran home as fast as I could and called the police as soon as I was reunited with my phone. Of course, I sounded exactly the way a sweaty, exhausted lady at 3 a.m. would. I was quickly dismissed. Perhaps they would have taken me more seriously if I told them what I saw on my way home. On a lamppost, a ragged thing nestled among the Run Club posters was a missing person poster with James' face. He's been gone for over 4 months and was the last one to go missing. Running should be a solitary pleasure. I know that now. But it's been months since this happened, and something is drawing me back. Maybe it's the increasing number of disappearances in our small city, or maybe it's the fact that an equal number of new Run Club posters have been going up. I'm terrified, but I know I need to get to the bottom of what I saw. Maybe I'll go back to Run Club,